Hey, Rob here for Quadratec. Today, we're going to be upgrading the audio system in this Jeep Gladiator, taking it to the next level without any complicated or custom wiring installation required, thanks to the complete all-in-one audio system upgrade from Rockford Fosgate. This kit includes absolutely everything you need in one box to totally transform the way that you listen to music when you're behind the wheel of your Gladiator. Packed with 1,800 watts of power. Whether you like to leave your hardtop or soft top up or doors on, or strip your Jeep down to enjoy the great weather, this kit is sure to deliver plenty of power so that you can always enjoy your music when you find yourself in your Jeep cruising down the road or the trail. Just a few short months ago, we were able to check out this kit while we were attending the 2023 SEMA show in Las Vegas. Not only was there the complete kit for the Gladiator on display, but also a kit for the 2018 to 2023 Jeep Wrangler JL. If you want to get more information about that kit, as well as watch my full breakdown and installation, you can click the info button to watch that video. This kit for the Gladiator is compatible with the 2020 to 2023 Jeep Gladiator, including all of the trim levels, even the bass and premium audio options from the factory. Now, if you want to check out the complete list of compatible vehicles, you can click the info button to head over to quadratec.com. As I mentioned, this kit includes absolutely everything you need right out of one box. And if we take a look at what we get in here, we'll see a pair of 10-inch subwoofers in a new enclosure designed to install underneath the rear seat of the Gladiator. In addition to that, you'll also find a relocation bracket that moves the jack to a new location to make room for that sub box. We'll also find a relocation kit to transfer over that factory bolt storage holder for things like your hardtop and your door bolts when they're not in use. You're also going to find a pair of 6.5-inch component speakers for the dashboard, as well as an additional pair of tweeters that install in the factory location up on top of the dashboard. We're going to get a second set of 6.5-inch component speakers here in an all-new soundbar. We're not simply retrofitting new speakers into the factory soundbar. Rockford Fosgate includes a complete new soundbar that has been designed and tuned to allow those components to perform to their highest level. You're also going to get a pair of amplifiers. As I mentioned, this kit packs 1,800 watts of power. So we've got a 1,000 watt and an 800 watt amplifier, each designed to separately drive both those two 10-inch subwoofers, as well as the rest of the component speakers found throughout the Jeep. You're also going to get absolutely everything you need for an easy plug-and-play style installation that you can do right at home in your own driveway or garage with just a few basic hand tools. So there's no custom splicing of any wiring required. You'll find things like the T-harness that plugs into the factory radio. There's also an additional harness provided if you've installed an aftermarket radio in your Gladiator already. You'll find things like an included fuse holder and mounting bracket, as well as things like a 12-volt accessory socket relocation kit that moves it from the dash into the glove box to make room for a new remote base level control knob. Now you're also going to get this complete install kit in here that includes all the different pieces of hardware, even things like drilling templates and the drill bits and hole saw to complete your install to allow you to move that 12-volt accessory socket and install that new base level control knob. As I mentioned, this kit packs 1,800 watts of power and it's built to withstand the elements. Rockford Fosgate knows that the top and doors on your Gladiator can be removed, and so everything has to be able to stand up to the elements. The included digital sound processing unit not only interfaces with all of the existing wiring and the factory or aftermarket radio in your vehicle, but it also includes a custom Gladiator-specific Jeep tune preloaded to give you the best possible sounding audio profile for whatever music you find yourself listening to when you're behind the wheel of your Gladiator. Now, as I mentioned, that installation is easy and it's been designed to be a 100% plug and play, and I'm going to show you how to tackle that right now. The very first step to begin our installation is to disconnect the cables here at the battery. Now, depending on the model and year of your vehicle, you may have a different number of negative connections here on the terminal at the battery. It's important to make sure we just disconnect and isolate them all from each other using some tape so there's no chance that they come in contact while we're completing our installation. We can also disconnect the positive terminal as well as the negative connection here on the inside of the fender. By doing so, we'll ensure there's no chance that we accidentally short anything out during the installation. I also want to add that through this installation, you may notice the color of the vehicle change from blue to gray. And that's because we're using both a Wrangler and a Gladiator, one with bass and one with premium audio, to show you all of the different available options throughout the installation. The important thing to note is just follow along with the steps. Don't worry about the color of the vehicle. This is also a great time to go ahead and remove the hard top from your Gladiator or fold back the soft top to give you better access to some of the trim panels on the Sport Bar that we'll be removing. To remove the overhead soundbar, we first need to remove all of the Sport Bar trim surrounding it on both the front and rear seat areas on the driver and passenger side of the vehicle. This trim is held in place with a series of T25 Torx screws on both the bottom and top side of the trim. The screws on the top side can be difficult to get to with the top in place, and that's why we suggest to either fold back your soft top or completely remove your hard top if your Jeep is equipped with one. After removing those screws, the trim panels are simply held in place with a series of clips, which could require just a little bit of pressure to remove them. Next, we'll remove the center portion of the trim at the top of the B-pillar. These are held in place with one additional T25 Torx screw and then a series of clips. Now we can move on to removing the dome light assembly. Using a panel pry tool, we can pull down to release the clips and then unplug and set the light aside. Now we can remove the center trim piece, again held in place with a series of screws along the front leading edge. With those out of the way, we can pull down on that panel to reveal the 6 10mm bolts that are holding the overhead soundbar in place. Start by disconnecting the electrical connection at the soundbar and then remove those 6 bolts. The overhead soundbar will still be held in place lightly with an alignment pin on each side that will require slight pressure to release it. With the factory unit out of the way, we can now install the Rockford Fosgate soundbar preloaded with those two 6.5-inch component speakers. Not only are we getting a great factory-like fit and finish with the new molded soundbar, we have the addition of some Rockford Fosgate logos on the speaker grills, along with this great silver accent that matches a lot of the other trim already found in the Gladiator. Now, to install it, it's basically the reverse of the removal of the factory unit. We do have 2 alignment pins, one at each end of the soundbar. We can go ahead and lift it up in place. Go ahead and get those 2 pins aligned. They'll hold it in place while we can secure it with those factory 10mm screws that we previously removed. Then we can go ahead, plug in the speaker electrical connection, resecure the wiring with the factory push clip through the hole provided in the new soundbar, and then reinstall the rest of the remaining trim in the reverse of the removal, being sure to plug in the connection to our dome light before we install it. Next up, we'll get started by replacing the factory tweeters with the new Rockford Fosgate tweeter. Using a panel tool, go ahead and pry up on the tweeter cover grill. With that out of the way, we're going to be removing 2 screws that hold the tweeter in place. So you can use either a Phillips head or a 7mm socket to remove these screws. With them out of the way, lift the tweeter out of the dash and disconnect it. Now the new tweeter is simply going to drop right back in with that factory plug and play connection. Connect the tweeter, drop it in, aligning this notch in the tweeter adapter with the tab on top of the dash. Resecure it with those 2 screws, and for now, we're going to leave that grill cover off until we're finished with the rest of the dash installation. Now with that passenger side done, I can move on to getting the driver side tweeter in. Again, just simply connect that factory plug and play connection, feed the wiring down into the dash, aligning that tab. We can drop that tweeter right back in, and all that's left to do is secure it with those 2 factory screws. Now next up, we're going to be moving down to replacing the lower speakers in the dash. This is going to be the most intimidating part of this installation. While not necessarily difficult, we are going to be disassembling a lot of the dash components to get access to replace those factory speaker pods. So just go slow and take your time. Well, the first step we need to do is to go ahead and remove this lower panel under the steering wheel. It's simply held in place with some clips. We can grab it and set it aside. Next, we'll remove the climate control panel by grabbing it close to the steering wheel and pulling towards you to release the clips. With the panel pulled out, we can disconnect the 2 electrical connections on the back side of the panel and set it aside. Next, we'll remove 2 screws at the bottom of the radio trim. With the screws removed, lift at the bottom of the trim to release the clips, removing the trim from around the radio. Next, we have 4 screws securing the radio in the dash. With those removed, pull the radio straight towards us and disconnect all of the connections on the back side of the radio. Now we have 1 screw left at the top of the radio cavity, securing the top trim piece to the dash. We'll pull that screw out. Now, starting at the driver's side behind the steering wheel, pull that trim piece directly towards you to release the clips, removing that trim piece from the top of the dash. Now, if any of these clips are left in the dash when you remove it, that's okay. We'll go ahead and remove them with a pair of pliers. Bend those vampire teeth back down so we can reinstall those clips onto the trim panel and then set it aside to be reinstalled later. Next, we'll remove the center trim panel from the dash panel. There's 1 screw holding this in place. Protect this panel from damage by placing a soft cloth over the gear shift selector. With the screw removed, we can simply pull the panel towards us to release the clips, disconnect all of the electrical connections on the backside, and then set it aside for later. Next, we'll have 4 screws securing the trim around the gauge cluster. With those removed, grab that trim panel, pulling straight towards you to release the clips. We'll set that aside. Next, we need to remove the driver's lower kick panel. The first step to do this is to pull the panel, revealing the driver door wiring connector. With that out of the way, we can release the red locking tab, lift the lever to disconnect the driver's door wiring connection. There's 1 10mm nut hidden just to the side of that wiring connector. With that removed, now we can remove the floor liner from the vehicle, and we're gonna pull the entire kick panel towards the center of the vehicle to release it from the clips, as well as using a panel tool down through the driver's door jamb to help release that trim panel, and then we can lift it out of the way and set it aside. Next, we have 7 screws to remove underneath the steering column, 2 on the steering column trim. With those pulled out of the way, we have 5 more screws on the trim surrounding the headlight control switch. With those 5 screws removed, we can now grab a panel tool to release the side panel, simply held in place with some clips. This is going to reveal 5 more screws. Starting at the top, we'll remove the top 4 screws. Now, the lowest screw on here is going to be pretty difficult to access because it is blocked by the door jamb. This is where a flexible head 7mm ratcheting wrench will really make your life a lot easier. Go ahead and remove the lowest screw underneath of the dash, along with this last remaining screw we revealed by pulling off that side panel. With all of the screws removed, we should now be able to lift that panel up out of the way, disconnecting the headlight controls panel on the back side before we set it aside. Next, we have a series of screws to remove along this lower dash support bar. We have 1 8mm screw at the top of the vertical bar that we'll remove first. Next, we have a 10mm screw at the bottom of that vertical bar, along with 3 other 10mm screws to remove. We can also remove the 7mm screw all the way to the outboard side of that horizontal support bar. Next, we'll remove the 3 screws securing the speaker pod into the dash. We have 1 on that support bar, along with 1 at the top and 1 that we can access through the side of the dash. With all of the screws removed, we can now remove that horizontal support bar by pulling it towards us and bending it down. That's going to give us the clearance to remove that speaker pod from the dash. Simply pull it out of the dash. We have 3 electrical connections on the backside to disconnect, 1 for the speaker itself and 2 for a module that's mounted on the backside of that speaker pod. We have a couple additional steps that we need to complete before we can move on to installing the new speaker here on the driver's side. We'll need to install some of the wiring in the dash, along with the amplifiers under the driver's seat, so that we can run all of that additional wiring and connect it to the DSP unit, which is going to be installed here in the cavity of the dash behind the driver's side speaker. So the next step for us here is to go ahead and remove the driver's side seat, removing the 4 bolts, securing it in place. We can rock the seat back, disconnect the electrical connections, and lift the seat out of the vehicle. Start by removing the 10mm nut on the ground post. Next, using a utility knife, we'll need to cut a small L-shaped slice into the factory carpet to reveal an additional mounting post. Remove the 10mm nut from this mounting post as well. Next, we can install the amplifiers on the pre-assembled mounting bracket by installing the 2 tabs over top of the studs and resecuring the stud underneath of the flap in the carpet with the factory 10mm nut. Next, we'll route the ground cable underneath of the amplifier mounting bracket, install it on top of the grounding post, and secure it in place with the factory nut. Next, we can route the subwoofer output leg of the harness towards the back of the Jeep by pulling it underneath of the amplifier mounting bracket and tucking it between the trim and the carpet on the driver's side door jamb. Continue tucking this wire underneath of the trim, routing it towards the back of the vehicle. You'll end up next to the rear seat in between the driver's side door and the end of the driver's side door jamb trim. Next, we can route the speaker level input and output legs of the harness up towards the dashboard. Start by tucking them underneath of the center console and continue feeding them between the console and the carpet until you get to the dashboard. Next, we'll route the power cable through the firewall. We can start by popping the clips to remove the trim cover over the wire routing path. Then we can install the red power lead into this routing tray, resecure the cover in place, and then continue routing it up towards the firewall. If your Jeep is equipped with an automatic transmission, you'll find a plug located on the firewall just to the outboard side of the brake booster. If your Jeep is a manual transmission, you will have to drill a hole through your firewall. After removing this cap in the firewall, we can feed the power cable through the hole and continue pulling the cable all the way out until the pre-installed replacement grommet can be seated into the hole in the firewall. Before we can install the rest of the wiring in the dash, this is a great time to complete the installation of our passenger side replacement speaker. Start by opening the glove box, pull up on the soft open arm on the inboard side and towards the center of the vehicle to release it. Then push up on the tab under the grab handle to allow the glove box to drop open so we can remove it and set it aside. Next, using a panel tool, pop off the trim cover on the outboard side of the passenger grab handle, revealing a 10mm bolt. Remove the 2 10mm bolts, securing the grab handle in place, and set it aside. Next, we can remove the 3 screws along the bottom edge of the glove box opening. Then, using a trim panel tool, remove the airbag trim panel. There are 2 additional screws hidden underneath of this panel. Next, we can remove the 4 screws along the top edge of the airbag panel. With those removed, using a 13mm socket with an extension, we can reach 2 bolts hidden on the bottom side of the airbag panel. Reach up through the glove box cavity to access these 2 bolts. The airbag assembly does not need to be unplugged or removed from the vehicle. We just need enough room to access the screws behind it. You'll find 1 screw below the air vent and 1 above the outboard air vent that we need to remove. Next, we can remove the outboard side trim panel to reveal the additional screws hidden underneath. Start by removing the 4 screws that you can easily access. The 5th lowest screw is partially covered by the door jamb. This is where a flexible head 7mm ratcheting wrench will make it a lot easier to remove this screw. We should now be able to pull the passenger side dashboard trim away from the dashboard, allowing us access to the screws that secure the passenger side speaker in place. 1 screw can easily be accessed from the side. There are 2 additional screws holding the speaker in place. A stubby Phillips head screwdriver can be helpful in removing the upper screw. With all the screws removed, we can now drop the speaker pod out from the bottom of the dashboard, disconnecting the wiring plug on the back side of the pod. The new speaker installs in the reverse of the removal. Remember to first plug in that wiring connection and then reinstall the 3 screws securing the speaker pod to the dashboard. With the speaker in place, we can reinstall all of the previous screws that we removed, resecuring the dash panel in place along with the airbag assembly and grab bar. We'll leave the glove box removed at this time to allow additional room for routing some wiring. Next, we're ready to install some of the wiring into the dash. We can start with our 12-volt accessory relocation harness. This harness features two legs that we're going to run from the center cavity in the dash out towards the glove box cavity. With both of those into the glove box, we can now find the matching connector for the backside of the 12-volt accessory socket and connect it to the new harness. Next, we can grab our T-harness. You can see that it features a matching connector, the same as the one designed to plug into the back of the factory radio. Connect the opposite end of this connector to the factory radio harness by aligning it and closing the lever to latch it into place. Next, we'll run one leg of this harness that's designed to plug into the CAN bus network port. This is going to feed from the radio cavity down towards the glove box cavity. With that pulled through, we can leave that hanging in the glove box for now. Next, we'll grab the two remaining legs of the harness. These are first going to be fed from the top radio cavity down to the lower center dashboard cavity. With both of them successfully pulled down, we can now feed them out towards underneath of the steering wheel. Now finally, the third harness that we need to route at this point is for our remote base level control knob. This is going to run right here from the lower center dash cavity outboard to underneath of the steering wheel. At this point, all of your wire harnesses should be routed so that they're left exposed underneath of the steering wheel here. It's time to go ahead and install the digital sound processing unit, and this is going to install up here into the cavity of the dashboard just behind the driver's side speaker, so closer to the firewall. But we need to make some of our wiring connections to the DSP before we can install it. So we're going to start by grabbing our remote base level control wire harness, plug this into the side of the unit. We also have our output harness that is going to send the amplified output signal back to all of our speakers. Plug right here. On the opposite side, we can plug in the input harness. We also have the vehicle side harness that plugs in. You want to ensure that this is set to a low input level before we install it. Now you'll also find a USB extension harness in the box. You want to connect this to the side of the DSP before we install it. And we're going to route this down here to the driver's side kick panel. And that's going to make it really easy for us. Should you have to do any updates in the future, you don't have to uninstall this unit from the dash. You can simply plug in this USB cable that will be accessible down here in the driver's footwell. And we also want to make sure that we're plugging in our remote turn on lead, the blue wire here with the bullet connector. Go ahead and connect that. And now at this point, it's a great idea to go ahead and clean up and zip tie some of this wiring. It's going to make for the install of this DSP unit up in the dash be a little bit easier. So just go ahead and tuck all of your wiring up nice and neat close to the unit, and then we can use the holes provided on the bracket to zip tie them securely in place. With all of our wiring zip tied to the DSP, we're ready to install it up into the cavity in the dash using the 3 provided 10mm screws. If your Jeep came from the factory with the premium audio system, you'll first need to remove the amplifier that's mounted in the location that the DSP is meant to install. You'll also need one additional harness that's designed specifically for the premium audio system because you will not be reusing that amplifier. You'll plug these 2 connections into the wiring left in place in the dash, and the opposite side will plug in the wiring that's going to lead down to the amplifiers. If your Jeep came from the factory with the base level audio system, you don't need to worry about removing anything before you install the DSP. You can simply make the connection from the T-harness to the harness that we previously routed from the amplifiers up towards the dash. With the T-harness connection made to the amplifier lead, we can now raise the DSP up into the dash, tucking the wires neatly around the dash supports and securing the bracket in place with the 3 provided screws or the 3 factory screws if you removed the amplifier from your premium audio equipped Jeep. Route the USB cable down along the driver's side. We can tuck this wire next to the factory door electrical connector. It will be concealed when we later install the driver's kick panel trim. Before we can install the new speaker pod, we first need to transfer a module from the backside of the factory speaker pod over to the new pod. Using a 7mm socket, remove the 3 screws holding the module in place, transfer the module over and resecure it with those factory screws. At this point, we can install the new Rockford Fosgate speaker and pod into the dash, making sure to plug in the electrical connection for the speaker on the backside, along with the 2 connectors into the module secured on the backside of the speaker pod. Secure the entire thing in place with the 3 screws we removed earlier. Now we can reassemble the majority of the dash at this point in the reverse order of removal, resecuring all of the dash structural supports, followed by the headlight trim and surround. Before we move farther, this is a great time to install the driver's kick panel trim, setting it into place and pulling it towards the outside of the vehicle to resecure it with clips. Don't forget to resecure it with that single 10mm nut that we removed earlier. Next, we can reinstall the driver's seat, set it in place in the vehicle, and lower it back so that we can access the electrical connections on the underside of the seat. Make sure to reconnect the 1 large connector as well as the smaller yellow connector. With both of those made, we can now lower the seat in place and secure it with the 4 T50 Torx bolts. Next, we can finish some of the dash reassembly by reinstalling the gauge cluster trim and surround, snapping it into place and securing it with the 4 factory screws. We can reinstall the dash top trim by simply snapping it back into place and securing it with the single screw above the radio cavity. Reconnect all of the wiring connections on the backside of the radio so that we can set it back into the dash cavity and secure it with the 4 factory screws, followed by the radio surround trim, which simply snaps into place and is held with 2 screws on the bottom side. And next up, we can reinstall the tweeter grille covers by simply setting them in place and pushing down to secure them with the clips. Before we can reinstall the lower center dash trim panel, we first need to remove the 12-volt accessory port. We're going to be doing that so that we can install the new base level control knob. To do so, we're going to be using the 12-volt accessory port removal tool that's included with the kit out of the box. First, open up the 12-volt accessory port and then insert the T-shaped tool down, aligning it with the 2 tabs inside of the socket. Once it's locked into place, we can now pull the inside of the accessory socket out. With the insert removed, we can now flip it over and depress the tabs on the backside to remove the rest of the accessory port. From here, we can set this aside as we'll not be reusing it. Grab the remote base level adjustment knob and an 11mm socket. We need to first start by removing the nut found on the adjustment knob. You shouldn't actually need a tool. A simple socket itself should be plenty of leverage to get that nut off of the adjustment knob. With the nut removed, we can install the knob from the back side of the panel, aligning this alignment tab with the notch on the panel. Now we'll reinstall the outer portion of the bezel, which also features an alignment peg. Once you have that set in place, we can reinstall the nut to secure it. Again, using that 11mm socket. Finger tight is plenty. We don't want to over tighten this and crack the plastic adjustment. Now finally, we can install the knob by aligning the mark on the knob itself with the small mark at about the 7 o'clock mark there on the base. Simply line that up and push it into place. And you'll notice, because of the magnets on the knob itself, when we adjust the base level, well, that Rockford Fosgate logo is always going to stay right side up. I like that attention to detail. Now we're ready to reinstall the lower dash panel back into place, making sure that you reattach all of the electrical connections on the backside of the panel, in addition to the new remote base control knob connection. With that panel in place, we can move on to installing the climate control panel, by simply plugging in the 2 factory wiring connections on the backside of the panel and snapping it back into the dash. Next, we'll reinstall the lower knee panel below the steering column by simply lining it up and snapping it into place. Before we can reinstall the glove box, we first need to install the new 12-volt accessory socket inside of the glove box. We'll use the included template to locate the 4 holes that we need to drill. Using the provided bit included in the kit, drill through the template in the 4 locations. With the holes drilled, you can compare the new 12-volt accessory socket mounting bracket to locate which holes will be used to mount the bracket on the inside of the glove box. The 4th hole, closest to the lower backside of the glove box, needs to be enlarged as a wire pass-through. We're going to be using the included hole saw to enlarge that 4th hole. The 12-volt accessory socket will install inside the glove box by first feeding the wire harness through the hole that we just drilled, and then we'll secure the accessory socket and the mounting bracket in place with the 3 provided button head screws. With everything secure, we're ready to install the glove box into the vehicle. The accessory socket relocation harness features 2 output legs. Rockford Fosgate has provided you an extra 12-volt output for an additional aftermarket accessory if you'd like to install one. Using the included pigtail, we can plug it into one leg of the harness. It features positive and negative outputs with pre-installed butt connectors. I'm going to remove the pigtail since we're not using it. At this point, we can connect the CAN bus connector featuring the white and black pass-through plugs. Now, that black pass-through plug is in case your star connector is completely full. This white plug will simply install into the green star connector in any of the open locations. If they're already all filled up, simply unplug any one of the factory connections and plug it into that black pass-through port. Grab the glove box and the new accessory socket wire harness and plug it into the other leg of the harness. Now we can simply tuck the wiring up into the dash and reinstall the glove box in the reverse of the removal. To begin installing the subwoofers, we first need to remove the factory jack from underneath the rear seat. We'll also be removing the under-seat storage compartment. Whether you have the lockable compartment or the open compartment, both are removed in the same manner. Using a T40 Torx bit, remove the 4 bolts, securing the divider to the floor of the Jeep. Then we can remove the under-seat organizer from the Jeep completely. Next, remove the 2 T25 Torx screws, securing the plastic trim beneath the rear seat buckles, and remove the trim. We also need to remove the factory hardtop and door bolt organizer. Lift the cover, remove the insert, and remove the 2 10mm nuts securing the tray in place. Next, we can begin the assembly of the subwoofer box by installing the 2 mounting brackets along with the hardware provided. We'll begin by installing the driver side bracket first, which is marked on the bottom side of the bracket. After installing the driver side bracket with the 2 screws provided, we can move on to installing the passenger side bracket as well. Next, we'll install the hardtop and door bolt organizer box into the space provided in the new subwoofer box. We'll start by dropping the plastic liner into the cavity in the molded subwoofer box. Next, insert the lower half of the hardtop bolt and door bolt organizer tray. Begin by securing it with the shorter of the 2 provided screws closest to the tapered end of the box. The longer screw will insert through the other mounting hole. It can be helpful to lift the box up so you can access the nut on the bottom side to tighten this bolt. With the box securely fastened, we can reinstall the insert along with the cover. Next, we'll remove the 2 outermost bolts securing the seat bracket to the floor. Depending on the year of your Gladiator, this could either be an E14 or a 12mm bolt. You'll find 1 bolt on each side of the Gladiator. Now, before we set the subwoofer box in place, now is a great time to vacuum out the rear interior of your Gladiator, as this area will be inaccessible once we've got the subwoofers installed. Carefully set the subwoofer enclosure into the rear seat area of the Gladiator, sliding it into place. Now, you'll want to be sure that the bottom mounting bracket engages with the bracket installed on the floor of the Gladiator for secure installation. Next, we'll reinstall the 2 factory bolts that we just removed, securing the subwoofer box on top of the rear seat mounting brackets. The last step for our subwoofer box is to connect the pre-terminated wiring from the subwoofer enclosure to the harness that we've previously routed and left tucked underneath of the trim here at the rear door. We can tuck this wiring behind the subwoofer box for a clean install. Finally, we can relocate the factory jack to the area behind the driver's side of the rear seat. We'll start by removing the liner in the tray to reveal the 2 factory bolts. After removing those bolts, we can then set the provided mounting bracket into place. We can also set the molded styrofoam mounting block into place on top of the bracket and secure everything into place using the 2 provided screws. After removing the jack handle from the jack, we can then set the jack into place in the molded styrofoam bracket. And finally, set the jack handle in place and strap everything securely behind the rear seat. The last part of our install is to finish up our main power cable harness. We'll start at the brake booster in the engine bay where we left this cable earlier during the install. Feed the power cable behind the coolant tank reservoir, running it towards the passenger side next to the battery. Before we can install the fuse holder, we first need to remove the cover, and using a 4mm Allen wrench or Allen socket, remove the set screw. We need to remove the insert as well as the piece of plastic that's installed from the factory to prevent the set screw from falling out. With the plastic removed, we can reinstall the insert into the fuse holder, securing it in place with the set screw. Install the power cable through the bracket and into the fuse holder, ensuring that the power cable is fully seated in place into the fuse holder. Secure it by tightening the 4mm set screw. This is also a great time to ensure that the set screw on the opposite side of the fuse holder is tight as well. Remove the 2 10mm nuts found on the top pinch seam at the back of the engine bay. Install the fuse holder bracket on top of the studs and secure it in place. Using the included zip tie edge clips, push 3 of them along the same pinch seam running from the passenger to the driver's side of the engine bay and secure the power cable with zip ties to the edge clips. Continue pulling the power cable towards the driver's side of the vehicle, securing the excess cable around the brake booster with the included zip ties. At this point, we're ready to make our power connection to the positive terminal of the battery. Remove the 11mm nut on the positive terminal, install the power cable, and secure it in place. Now finally, we can reconnect all of the negative cables that we removed before we began the install, starting at the inside of the passenger side fender, as well as the negative terminal on top of the battery. With the installation complete, all we have left to do is to allow the new Rockford Fosgate system to reprogram some of the settings in your Jeep. And depending on which audio system your Gladiator came from the factory with, either the base or premium audio system, you'll follow one of 2 procedures. Because this Gladiator had the premium audio system, we'll simply lock the doors and walk away. And we can come back about 20 minutes later. Now, it is important that you take the key fob with you and remove it from a close proximity to the vehicle. This will allow all of the modules in the system to fully power down, allowing the new settings to be programmed. Now, during this time, that base level control knob will remain illuminated. When the backlighting on the knob turns off, it's letting you know that the program is successful, and at this point, you can unlock your Jeep, hop in, and give the new audio system a test. Now, if your Jeep came with the base audio system, you'll follow a slightly different procedure. You'll first lock, then unlock the Jeep, hop in. Without putting your foot on the brake, you'll press the start-stop button twice to put the Jeep into run mode. Then, we'll release and reset the parking brake 2 times in a row. You'll hear the vehicle's horn honk 1 time. Then, we can hit the left turn signal, causing the vehicle to honk 1 more time. After a few moments, you'll hear 2 honks from the vehicle's horn. Next, you'll notice that the radio will power cycle twice, turning off and restarting. During this time, it's reprogramming the settings. After the second restart, you can simply power down the vehicle and open the door to shut down all of the systems. At that point, you've successfully completed the programming operation. Next time you get back in your vehicle, we can simply hit that start-stop button, turning the accessory mode on to power up the radio, and then we can go ahead and fire up some music to put this new system to the test. Now, I have to tell you, no matter what you're watching this video on, whether it be your phone, tablet, or laptop, the speakers just aren't going to do this kit justice. Packing 1,800 watts of power, this all-in-one kit from Rockford Fosgate is sure to totally transform the audio system in your Gladiator so that you'll always have plenty of enjoyment whenever you find yourself behind the wheel of your Jeep. Now, I love the factory level fit and finish you get with this kit, down to that remote base level control knob. The touch, the look of the knob matches perfectly with the other knobs on the dash from the factory. Of course, we've got that completely new molded overhead soundbar with the Rockford Fosgate grills and silver accents. It matches the rest of the interior perfectly. And with that new under-seat subwoofer box and those two 10-inch subwoofers, this system is sure to blow the top and doors off your Gladiator. Now, if you want to get more information or to purchase a Rockford Fosgate all-in-one complete audio upgrade for your 2020 to 2023 Jeep Gladiator, you can click that info button to head over to Quadratec.com. Of course, if you have any comments or questions about the kit or how to get it installed, you can always leave this for me down in the comments section below or by simply heading to Quadratec.com. And as always, if you haven't already and you like these videos, do me a huge favor, make sure you hit that thumbs up button. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button as well as the notification icon so be sure to catch all of our latest videos. Till next time, I'm Rob. I'll see you out on the trail.